This is our emergency preparedness and response series brought to you by the Florida Association of Museums Foundation and Florida Humanities. This particular program is the fifth in a six-part series on emergency response. And this one will be tabletops for small organizations. So thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank our partners, Florida Humanities, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, which is a part of FEMA, the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, the Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, Visit Florida, Cure Collections Care, Florida Museum, and the Society of Florida Archivists. Funding for this program is provided by a grant from Florida Humanities with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Just to go over a few housekeeping items, my name is Carmen Godwin. I'm the FAM Foundation Program Manager. We also have Carolyn Tharp-Weiss with us today. She is our Membership and Financial Manager. The webinar is being recorded. However, the portions that are in breakout sessions will not be recorded as part of the webinar series. In this agenda, we have 4 segments of scenarios that we'll go through with our speaker. And we will have time during the program for Q&As. If you have any questions throughout the program, you're welcome to use the chat box at any time, and I will make sure that your questions get answered. However, if you use the chat box while you're in your breakout room, I will not be able to see that because that's just for the people in your breakout room. So please use that chat box during the, when we're all in the same meeting room together. Also, if you want to ask a question directly to our speaker, you can just unmute yourself and ask her directly. Finally, we have a survey that we'll be sending out after the program. It takes just 2 minutes to complete, and we ask that you fill that out for us so we can understand what you thought about our program and also find out what kinds of programs you'd like to see FAM offer in the future. Now I would like to introduce our speaker. Rebecca Kennedy is a collections care specialist for Cure Collections Care. She has worked in Florida museums and was a collections manager and preservation specialist at the Smithsonian for 11 years. She's certified in first aid to cultural heritage in times of crisis and is the chair of the Association of Registrars and Collections Specialists Emergency Committee. She has responded to institutional emergencies throughout the country, and so we are really happy to have her here to share her expertise and the hands on the ground work that she's done to share with you and help you through some of the things that you might have to deal with in the future. So I'm going to pass this over to Rebecca right now. Rebecca?
Hi, sure. Carmen, I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, great.
Thank you all for joining today. I'm hoping you get a lot of benefit from the scenarios we're going to do today. And I'm just going to give you some guidance on, you know, how this is going to work. All right. So as Carmen was saying, feel free to, you know, ask me questions by unmuting yourself. You can also put things in the chat box, but this is really for you. So anything I can do to make this experience better, please let me know. So part of the process today that we're going to be doing with these scenarios is there's going to be 4 10-minute scenarios that each group is going to do. But between each of these scenarios, we'll come back together as a big group and follow it up with a discussion. So while you're in these groups, you should appoint someone who's going to present your results when we come back as a big group, but be prepared to present for 2 minutes or less. And this is just good practice because usually you don't have a lot of time to get your thoughts, opinions, and ideas across during an emergency. So practicing to get a lot of bulk information in a short period of time is just, you're one step closer to being ready. I want to encourage you to treat this as a real emergency. Do not use terms such as what we would do is, use more active words such as what we are doing or what we will do is X, Y, and Z. So try to get into the mindset of that this is an emergency that's actually happening to you in your institution at this moment. I want to also point out that when you see the scenarios, you're going to want to have more resources. You're going to want to have more information. But really, all that's on the slide is all you know. Only work with the people in your group. Those are the only people who showed up to help you with that emergency. And only worry about your role. Don't think about what facilities would be doing, FEMA, or anybody else. You can only control what you have, what information, what people, what resources you have. So also with each scenario, I'm going to give you discussion questions. These are just to help guide the conversation. You feel free to answer the questions as they are, but use them to start thinking about what type of response you need for these scenarios. So if your conversation naturally progresses to something else, that's great, just as long as it's on the aim of solving the emergency. You also kind of want to set up a leader who sets up the response. And I'm basing this information on the incident command structure. There's always a leader who kind of assigns roles and makes sure everything's laid out the way it is. This is just 2 examples of how an incident command structure could be laid out for a cultural institution. I mentioned the incident command structure in part 2 of the series on building a plan and how important it is to know what your command structure is and how to put that in your emergency plan. So now you kind of get to practice that a little bit, but you really just draw it out, just like you see it. Draw out a little chart of who's doing what. And something we mentioned in part 4 of the series on triage, introduction to triage and stabilization is, think about where you need teams, where you need people, what resources, what sections do you need? And this is just a reminder that there's usually a triage station, a packing station, new storage, people actually on the ground during retrieval. So I just wanted to share the slide with you. Hopefully you all have had a chance to look at those past lectures so that this is easier. If not, hopefully this motivates you to go back and watch them, because I believe they are available on the FAM YouTube channel. So any questions before we get started?
If you do have any questions, feel free to type in the chat box, or you can just go ahead and unmute yourself.
So the scenarios I know aren't going to travel with you to your breakout rooms. So I'm putting in the chat box now a link to a Google Drive that has all the scenarios. And hopefully you all can access that easily. Check your chat box. So with that, I'm going to go on to the first scenario. I'm going to give you a minute or so to read it. And then Carmen will happily put you into your breakout groups.
Yes.
Okay, so here's scenario 1. At 8 a.m. on Monday in July, staff arrive on site to discover the HVAC system is not working. The building, exhibition areas, and storage feel extremely humid and hot. Readings show the humidity is 95% and temperature is 85 degrees inside. The building has been closed all weekend, so there's no immediate indication of how long the HVAC system had been in failure. But staff does remember the HVAC working well on Friday. So this is your scenario, and these are the questions I kind of want you to start considering for all the scenarios, really, is what are the considerations for human health and safety? What steps should be taken to protect the artifacts? Who should be alerted to the situation? And how will you prevent this from happening again? So with that, Carmen, I think we're ready to go to our
I'll
groups.
open the rooms right now. Okay, it looks like everybody is back with us. Rebecca?
Thanks. So how did it go? Feel
We
free to
have
unmute yourself.
we have two breakout rooms. We could start with number 1, which was Kirsten, Larry, and Meg. If one of you would give us a summary of what you discussed.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you a summary. We actually had this happen, so this was an easy one for us. But so health and safety, mostly mold growth, because we work in South Carolina, just like Florida. This is a reality. So mold growth, and then heat exhaustion for the staff that would be responding to this is what we are currently most concerned with in this scenario. And the protection of the artifacts, again, the mold growth on the artifacts. So we are actively checking our stacks for mold growth on some of our most vulnerable collections. We have alerted, so we're in our scenario, a staff member has walked into the building and found this situation. And so they alert me as the incident commander and the head supervisor over this scenario. I have alerted the building owners because we lease the building as a state government agency, and they have alerted a company called Bear Mechanic who manages our HVAC system, and they're on their way to the building to fix the situation. And then the thing that we're going to do in the future to help prevent this from ever happening again is to increase our maintenance regime with Bear Mechanic from quarterly to monthly. And then we're going to try to set up an alert that goes out to our phones, like our fire suppression system does, to alert the supervisors on our team to any issues. And we're going to work with Bear Mechanic in the field when they arrive to possibly create an alternative filtration system and alert system within the HVAC system. So that's what we came up with.
Okay, great. Thanks, Meg. And good to see you again, Meg.
Hey, Becca.
What about the next group?
Yeah, the other room that participated was room 3. And in that room, we had Ellery, Emery, Monica, and Victoria. Can one of you give us a overview?
Sorry, Anna. So we have this happen, not to this extent, but quite often. We're actually going through a little bit right now. But for the considerations for human health and safety, on top of what Meg said, we have some elderly volunteers who work with us. So just keeping them hydrated and keeping them comfortable as well, on top of the staff who's dealing with it. So when this happens for us, our operations manager has contacts for our HVAC repairmen, and they're out usually within the hour of them getting a call. But currently for this, we're putting bids out as well to other AC repair companies. And for protection of the artifacts, Emery spoke about going through the collections, making sure there's no condensation pooling anywhere. What you talked about last session, if there is, if we have paper products, opening them up, letting airflow gently dry everything out. If we have in our collections a back door and the side door that we can both open to let air flow through. The same thing with our Pioneer House, open those windows, which are actually designed to let air flow through in South Florida. Our executive director gets alerted to the situation. Obviously, the repair company gets alerted, and preventing this from happening again, we check it every single day, our air and HVAC in all of our buildings, since it happens seemingly on the regular.
Yeah. I thought the scenario would hit home with a few Floridians and other people in the southern states. Anything else?
Are there any questions at this time about this scenario? Like, did anything come up that you need to ask a question about?
This is Emery. In our group, I think it was Victoria also made a good point that if anything is on loan, to be sure to do a condition report and inform the lender of what has happened.
Yeah, no, great point. So yeah, both groups seem to have touched on some of the really big highlights. Just to kind of summarize and add a little realness to this. Yeah, human health and safety is one of the biggest concerns when dealing with this. Museum people often are martyrs without meaning to be martyrs. And if you even remotely suspect mold, you should don an N95 at minimum, a half respirator at best, before you go into that site. And, part of this initial damage assessment that you have to do, you need to determine, is it safe for people to come in? What type of PPE do we need? But also considering those creature comforts, such as food, water, and where the bathroom is. Those are all kind of very big deals in these situations. It's also a conversation to have is, do we know that this HVAC system is actually going to come back online in a reasonable amount of time? Or do we need to consider evacuating some of our collections? Did anybody have any of those concerns?
Rebecca, so I had actually brought up the evacuating the collections thing. So we had in our museum a few years ago, the AC was out for a few days and we were supposed to be installing a new exhibit, and I just took the entirety of the exhibit out, just started over when, we got our AC back up and running.
Yeah, it's sadly a state of need, but making that initial alerting to facilities person on your staff or calling in an HVAC specialist and getting immediately a timeline from them of when is this going to be back on. And also, because it is Florida, or anywhere in the South where it's hot and humid, mold growth can easily occur within an hour. So you also have to start thinking about what is growing in your HVAC system while it's off. So even start thinking about like getting the inside your HVAC systems inspected for Legionnaire's disease, another mold growth that's just going to spread mold throughout your museum even further if that's not checked as well. So as with all the scenarios, this is something that's actually happened out in the world. We've all seen this. And the best thing you can do is, like you said, open up all those doors, open up all those windows, but make sure you have a meter that lets you know your temperature and humidity so you can actually gauge if that's working. And it also helps you set up those, okay, at step one, we're just going to open up doors and hope it gets better. We're not seeing any damage to the collection yet. We're doing okay. To that next trigger, which is like, okay, it's been 2 hours, mold starting to form. We need to consider getting, dehumidifiers or start evacuating the collection. To the next trigger of like, wow, we really absolutely have to get the collection out of here. It's just going to get worse. So during this initial phase, when you're just trying to figure things out, you only need a small team. So to answer Vincent's question, you don't need to necessarily send in all staff, all volunteers. You can keep them away and just send in like a few core people, such as the person in charge of collections, the person who can actually fix the problem. But you just need to get a general idea of what's going on. Because with this emergency right now is very minor, but it can quickly escalate. So just have those people on standby so that you can call them in as you've come up with a game plan. Yes, and I would close the museum to the public if the HVAC system's not working, because then it's a health hazard for them as well until you've gotten it all figured out. Any other questions about this scenario? Okay, so they're going to get a little bit harder as we progress, because I'm assuming you all are becoming more and more proficient with each one. So I'm going to move on to scenario 2. And again, it's on that same Google Doc I put in the chat earlier. So 11 p.m. on a Saturday in August, the National Weather Service has elevated the status of an approaching Category 4 hurricane from a watch to a warning. The museum is in the direct path of the hurricane, which is expected to make landfall within 36 hours. And again, we're answering sort of those exact same questions. I added an extra one here of what resources will you need? So with that, you guys ready to go back into your room? Any questions? All right, Carmen, I think they're ready.
All right, I'm going to open up the rooms. All right, welcome back, everybody. We ended up with two groups. So again, I'm going to ask for group number 3 to report back first this time, which was Ellery, Emery, Monica, Victoria, and then Shelby joined with them a little bit late as well.
So I'm going to go ahead and report for group 3. There were a lot of really good things coming from the group. We're all pretty aware of the FAM C2C information, and we use it. I know I use it yearly, and I was telling the group, no matter how much we all roll our eyes when we watch it again every year, it's good to watch and make yourself aware of it and refresh yourself with some of the salvage and recovery webinars and emergency action plan webinars. Again, I'm very lucky to be a part of the county because there are a lot of emergency procedures that are already in play for certain sites for the county, including the Parks and Conservation Resources Department, which I belong to. And so we have a pretty proactive list of things that we do as the emergency escalates. And it will trigger, a watch will trigger things that we're doing, like getting things off the floor, covering things with plastic, getting in the park area, getting benches put away, in the library areas, putting plastic sheeting over the library collection and making sure that the plastic sheeting's over our archival collection. We've got like 30 different historic buildings, so we're making sure that if anything's close to any buildings, our windows rather, we're moving it away, boxing it if we need to box it and getting it off the floor. I was talking about some of our volunteers and whether or not we, activate them, and I simply do not, because I cannot count 100% on them being here. When there's an emergency, well, prior to an emergency, anyone can say, yeah, I'll be there for you. But once the emergency happens, it's usually my experience that they are more concerned with, making sure their own house is okay, or getting out of the state, or doing whatever they need to do to be safe. And I think, not kind of hanging that baggage on your volunteers is part and parcel to number 1. So we've got limited amounts of PPE for staff, but we don't have a whole bunch of PPE for a bunch of volunteers we can't count on showing up anyway. So I think that's the first thing, is just the safety aspect of it, is knowing who you're going to reach out to, who's going to be there 100%. And as county workers, we are required to be there in an emergency. So I know that staff will be there. I talked a little bit about number 2, and I think this was across the board in group 3. Everybody has a plan to get things up off the floor, get things covered up with plastic, make sure that things are put away in safe places. I think somebody had brought up a list of their priority artifacts too that they've already made, so that they know they go there, they get those things, and those things need to either go to a safe location or be packed up. Who should be alerted to the situation? I think it's really a lot of networking. So we are alerting, it's almost like a hierarchy. We have in the county, of course, we have our emergency operations center, which when something like this happens, contacts our managers, that comes down to us, and then we contact all of our volunteers to make sure that they know what's going on. And we keep that contact as long as we possibly can. If we don't lose any electricity, then MailChimp is my best friend. I'm constantly sending out alerts and updates and emails that way. That way everybody kind of knows what's going on. I then know that everyone is safe, and the communication is then 2 ways. What resources will you need? Well, thankfully, again, I'm so happy FAM does these things because it allowed us to build out a really nice salvage and recovery kind of kit. So we have everything from plastic sheeting to newspaper print to headlamps to generators to bottled water to buckets to all of the things that have been listed, you know, on those lists for a
Well,
possible cleanup
Monica,
scenario.
let me stop you for a second. Like,
Oh, sure.
this is, all your information is great. My question is, what do you need for this scenario?
Oh,
Because I think, you know, as I said, you know, trying to keep to very brief summaries, you know, you got to treat it like you're reporting out. And a lot of your information is invaluable because that's the whole point of doing scenarios, is that you actually can identify more areas of, you know, more vulnerabilities within your risk. But, you know, think about with all these scenarios for everybody, what do you need for this? How are you going to
okay.
survive this?
I won't go through it all again, but I'll keep that in mind for next time.
Okay, it's a learning opportunity. But yeah, oh, sorry, excellent, the next one. But yeah, that's, I mean, it's so funny that like with the emergency kits that, you know, and anything that you've mentioned, it can totally change, as you were saying, Monica, based on what's happening. Like, are you at the warning? Are you at the watch? You know, is something else happening at the same time? So part of dealing with these emergency scenarios is to identify those areas where you can improve to make the situation better and to facilitate a faster recovery. However, at the same time, we could store something in our kits that we never use because that emergency never happens. But the one time you don't have it there, that's when that emergency will happen. So yeah, your resources of who you're going to call, what's going to happen, totally changes. So sorry to cut you off, Monica.
And one word of caution, if you are keeping things like bottled water ready, make sure that you put them in a climate controlled area because they will explode. Even the water, if it gets really hot, like Florida tends to do, we had to replace an entire kit because we had it in the plastic bin, and the water, I think it just expanded and like the whole thing blew up and everything got wet. So just a word of caution.
Good advice. What about the next group? Do you have a summary?
That would be Kirsten, Larry, and Meg.
Hey, my name is Kirsten, and our group came up with, for number one, health and safety. We'd first have to follow any evacuation orders. We are located in South Carolina, though our building is further inland. It has been possible to hit by hurricane. So we need to first follow the evacuation orders given by the governor. And afterwards, if it is safe to do so, have the staff that are within a 20-minute radius close to the building in action to protect the artifacts, which first we have, our building is a historic building. So our first priority is to make sure the windows are covered with boards since they are historic windows. Sandbag external doors after moving all artifacts to an 18-wheeler to have it evacuated to our designated site upstate, which is about 2 hours away from where we are, so it should be better protected there. The people who need to be alerted would include the supervisor, and then it actually, I think, works differently. The governor activates the plane, and then it's a top-down plan. We would only call in staff, no volunteers that are able and close enough. Any of the staff who live further away won't be called in due to safety. The resources we need include boards, hand trucks for moving artifacts, the 18-wheeler to ship the artifacts to the designated site, sandbags, and items to secure any exterior parts of the building that need to be secured from high winds or water damage, and to protect the building itself. There's not really a whole lot you can do to prevent a hurricane, but we can set up a plan, run a drill to time how long it'll take to put in all of these actions that need to be taken to secure the artifacts in the building, and have an updated list of the personnel who would be able to participate in securing the building and artifacts in the event of another hurricane in the future.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, it sounds like you guys have a good plan at your institution for, making sure everything falls into line. I want to go back to something you all said about like who you're going to actually deploy if these emergencies happen. One of the biggest, when you're doing your risk assessment, risk is a combination of 1,000 things that equal a risk. And sometimes one of the vulnerabilities that you calculate in is, can staff actually help? Is there some reason they can't? They don't have insurance coverage if they get hurt. They physically can't get there, or they have other right to work issues that need to be addressed. But one of the vulnerabilities, huge vulnerability that people never think about for some reason, is that your whole staff may not be able to get in for one reason or another, including possibly having to evacuate their family, to a totally different state, which we've seen happen many times. So that's something to think about. So usually we, like, you were saying, there's these triggers for a watch and there's these triggers for a warning, but maybe the watch should have a higher elevation than the and not wait till the warning, because by the time the warning comes along, people need to look inward and take care of themselves and their families, not their work. Unless you're a county person like Monica, who has to actually go in because it's her job. But yeah, just something to think about, that a lot of people are not going to put work before their personal health and safety. But yeah, bracing your building if it's a historical building, evacuating what needs to be evacuated. And when I say evacuation, your evacuation can be inside your building. You just need to move it to a room with no windows that's hopefully above the storm surge. So just evacuation can be within your institution. But also just think about what other resources, like what if are you anticipating electricity going out? Are you planning on, like going back to the first scenario, no HVAC system for extended period of time? So these preps are not only water. Think about the other elements that are inherent to a hurricane. A hurricane itself is not a risk. A hurricane is an incident, and that incident can escalate your risk level based on every other variable that's coming into play. Does that make sense? Everyone's done a risk assessment for their institution? All right. Okay, so any other questions about this scenario? Essentially, we are looking at an evacuation, either inside of our building or externally, but also what we call in situ stabilization. We are stabilizing anything we can before the storm shows up. But yeah, just think about if 36 hours is not enough, maybe you take your warning triggers over to the watch level, because the watch level is 72 hours before the storm arrives. Thoughts, feelings, emotions?
Does anybody have any questions at this point or additional thoughts on this topic? We all
Yeah.
dealt with it enough.
Yeah, and evacuations don't have to be complicated if you've not done one. I actually, unfortunately, had to do one for an institution up here a couple of weeks ago, and we evacuated the entire museum of about 20,000 objects in 8 hours with a team of 10 people. And you can ask Meg about this, but Meg did one of my trainings where she had to evacuate an entire museum in 4 hours. So it's, you can do these trainings and it helps you identify your weaknesses. All right, any other questions? All right. I'm going to move on to scenario 3. So a controlled burn in February, vegetation gets out of hand due to high winds and dry conditions. It took a week for the area to be declared safe for museum staff to inspect the building. So we're dealing with a controlled burn, out of control, so we have a fire. The building has not burned, but the HVAC system continued to run and air handlers brought a large amount of smoke and soot into the building. The smoke activated the fire suppression system in the building, and since staff cannot access the site, it has dumped over 1,000 gallons of water into the space, possibly preventing any fire sparks. So again, the same questions. We're trying to hit on like these core issues. Salvage, emergency response, evacuation does not need to be complex as long as you keep the focus. But try to take it to the next level. Any questions? All right, Carmen, I think we're ready.
Okay, I'm gonna open the rooms. All right, welcome back, everybody. So we've had some changes to room number 3. So we're gonna I'm gonna start with room number 1. Kirsten, Larry, Meg, if one of you could report back on this particular scenario, and then we'll move on to the next group. Thank you.
Sure. I think initially you'd have to look at the type of environment that we're working in, that we'll need to have some protective gear, mask, eye protection, likely complete suits if it's smoke and water and soot and that kind of thing, because there's going to be some respiratory concerns that we need to take care of, as well as things like muck boots and gloves, eye protection, really a full suit until we can really assess how difficult that environment is to work in. Beforehand, we've already identified a location that would be eventually an emergency site that we bring our artifacts to, which in our area that we've used before, a 5,000 square foot empty theater that had a good sized stage and an open area for us to work in. We need to also identify the people and the type of tasks that those people are going to be doing during this process of moving artifacts to this new location. Some people might be for documenting, other folks might be assigned moving things, and some people will be tasked as just driving during this whole process. But we need to identify the washing space at that location and all the material that we'll need to man or to well resource that area. During the process of alerting people, some of the folks that we have to be concerned with is, of course, the owner of that building that we will be using. Prior to this, we have maybe a deal, or not a deal, but an agreement on hand with alert numbers and rosters, so we can identify those people and contact them well before the actual emergency occurs. We also have an area that's off-site that has additional equipment for us to draw from. So we're not completely dependent upon the equipment that is within the building. We have other additional drying racks and other supplies that we would need to process these artifacts at this new location where things get moved to. So we can go to this safe additional area, the second area, and draw equipment from there to resource this new space where we'll be working on the artifacts. Some of the things that we'll need is, as I mentioned, would be coming from that resource spot, or that supply depot that's away from the emergency area. Some other things that we need, of course, is tables, chairs, all these kind of supplies. Additionally, how can we prevent this in the future? The best thing that we can do is continue to have periodic maintenance within our building, because if you don't look at things like air conditioning units or water filtration devices or anything within a building, if you ignore it and neglect it, you're going to have a problem down the road. This is kind of a problem with buildings that you leave for a month. This is why, as we're working at home right now, we still go back to the building and check out the building and make sure that we don't have anything that's been neglected, like a leaked pipe that might be causing damage within the building. So periodic maintenance can hopefully prevent some of these problems of maybe a big water leakage or fire that goes off and sets off the alarms. And with that, that's all I have for you.
Great, thank you.
All right.
What about the next group?
Yes, that was Ellery, Emery, Monica, Victoria, and we added Catherine, I believe, at the end of that.
Anyone in charge of speaking for the group? Oh, Catherine, you're muted. Oh,
We didn't designate anybody, but before we left, but I could sum up what we did, what we will do.
thank you.
So I think that we were focused again away from passive language into using action words. So we did kind of put together who is the leader. And when we thought about it, I think in my mind anyway, the first thing that came up was when you do CPR training, it's like you have to be very direct and designate people. There can't be any kind of waffling. So that's what we did. I designated that Ellery, was going to get her group and she will do the collections assessment, and then we'll prioritize what things are needing to come out of the building and probably go to a conservationist. But before I even did that, I said that Shelby needed to call a structural engineer and make sure that the building was safe to go into in the first place before we would, before I'm sending anybody in there to check on anything. So that's what I would need to do first is wait to hear back from Shelby and just make sure that, she's got word from the structural engineer that it's okay for staff to enter. If it is okay, like Larry said, we're gonna get them in the PPE that they need to be in because there's a lot of soot and probably mold and gross stuff going on in the building if it's been sitting for a week. So we'll get them in their PPE. Ellery's gonna go in, she's gonna do the assessment of the collections, and she's gonna prioritize items that need to go off to a conservator, and then she's going to put things in another place where they can stay, and we can kind of fix them in-house or salvage them in-house if need be. And then I was gonna get, I think it was Catherine. Catherine's gonna reach out to the owner of the building because we're gonna need a budget to repair anything that was damaged in that building that might have come out of that structural assessment. So we're gonna need them to give the approval that we can make those updates, and then they're gonna need to give us a budget for what we can do to the building. And then from there, we're going to get all those things in the collection out to the conservator that need to go. We're going to get a company that can come in and suck out the water, put in dehumidifiers, put in fans, and then we're going to go from there.
Great. And I think honestly, that was y'all's best one yet. You got the task down, you got what exactly you needed to do. A lot of the stuff I know feels repetitive, thinking about human life and safety, but it always comes first. But Larry's right. Anything in the soot and smoke are highly carcinogenic. That needs to be taken into consideration. Mold is also immune compromising, so it's something else to think about. While probably the least harmful thing in there is pretty much nothing, because we don't even know what that water is clean or not. Like that water might have been clean when it came out of the pipes, but it's now mixed with any sort of chemicals in your building, any sort of chemicals in your collection. That is now all in the water. I think I mentioned some of the other trainings, but we actually responded to in a museum where we physically could not save anything without full-blown hazmat because they had so much radium in their collection that it poisoned the water. So we had to, you had to have special clearances to remotely go in there and try to salvage the collection. And then that collection had to go through hazmat decontamination. So, you know, being well aware of where the chemicals are in your building, whether it's your object, whether it's your wallpaper, whether it's your carpeting, whether it's your windows. A lot of windows are made out of radium. So in case you haven't checked those, things to think about. So yeah, I mentioned human health and safety because you really got to think broadly, because you want everyone to come out of this alive and fine. That's our ultimate priority. But yeah, start protecting the artifacts. The worst thing to mix, if you guys watch the salvage training from part 4, is soot and water. Water makes soot dive deeper into the pores of all of your objects. So maybe those objects should become a priority. So you can start getting them out and getting them dry and getting them to the conservator, while things in another gallery that didn't receive any smoke damage is fine. So you can actually have you should have your priority list of objects. You always should, but maybe that priority shifts a little because we're dealing with essentially 3 hazards: the smoke and soot, the water, and, you know, being Florida mold. So you've got a lot going on. But, you know, part of this is also the salvage supplies. What do you need? Do you have something to remove the soot? Do you have something that measures the air quality to let you know if it's okay? Or are you depending on the fire department, or are they too busy fighting the wildfire? Just something to think about. You know, there's just all these little variables. And I think this was the best you guys have done, because of course you're going to get better with practice, really thinking that through. But I really force with, as Monica was saying in their group, setting up that incident command structure. Because you'll spend 20 minutes, well, she kind of wants to, but can we? No, someone needs to take control and point and tell you what to do. Like she said, just like CPR. So that's how the incident commander works. And because you all are doing this training, you're closer to being an incident commander. I believe in you all. So any questions about this one?
If you have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself and you can just ask it directly.
All right, so we're going to move on to the last one. And so start thinking about all your questions with this one. But yeah, try those different skill sets. Try setting up your teams through an incident command structure. Start thinking about if you need salvage, triage, maybe none of those, maybe skip to evacuation. What do you need and who's going to do it within your group? So start getting into that really nitty gritty of it all. All right. So here's your last scenario. There's been heavy rains for about a week, and at 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning in late May, there was a localized flooding alert. Many roads to the museum are now unsafe to drive. The storms continue through to Friday, causing power disruptions. Area restoration is estimated to take 2 to 3 days. Staff are barred from the building until the flood water recedes, which is the following Monday. So Wednesday through Monday, you have no access to your building, but to hope and pray does not receive any damage. The building has clearly suffered 1 to 2 feet of water damage, which has now receded, leaving everything damp and moldy. All right, any questions?
Did you have the same questions with that scenario?
Yeah, same questions, but you know, take it the next step. Go a little bit further, dig deep. And I'll jump in on y'all's groups.
Okay, I'm going to open those rooms now then if you don't have any questions.
I think we look good.
All right.
All right. So how did it go? How would they go for, I don't know which group you want to start with.
We can start with number 3 first this time. And I think Monica was speaking before, but anybody, you know, if you guys decided you had a speaker, go ahead and give us an update on that.
Oops, this is Emery. I'll be happy to report. So as far as considerations, we don't know whether or not we have power. So being prepared with generators to run things such as dehumidifiers, lights, shop vac, any materials, communications, ensuring that someone is in charge of communications and that volunteers are notified not to come in, or any non-essential staff. This is a time that I would hope we have our supplies stored off-site And Catherine had, I believe it was Catherine, had a great suggestion to ensure that team members have their own personal PPE and kind of work gear and other necessities, perhaps in the trunks of our cars, so that we can be arriving. The person handling the incident commander, I think, would have copies of our checklists and our emergency numbers and other sorts of checklists for inventory and procedure, but also individuals would have their work gloves and their masks and other items for self-care and safety. Another suggestion was made to have that offsite in a travel trailer and have a four-wheel drive truck designated, either secured by rental or through a crew member, that we can pick up this travel trailer to bring our supplies, because if the supplies are inside and they're damaged, they won't be, as they'll be compromised. Asking, where did the water get in? Assuming that it's a flood, it's coming from the ground. But as far as prevention, examining where the source of the water came into the building and taking measures to try to, reduce risk or eliminate the problem. And cleanup, I think post the initial triage and moving items off-site and getting things dry and getting water out of the building, then deep cleaning the building, including plumbing and vents and rugs and other things that can harbor, germs and molds.
Great. What about the other? How about the other group?
Hey, we set up, there was only 3 of us to try to cover all of the jobs. I am the incident commander, Meg is the safety officer, and Larry is the public relations and volunteer coordinator. Our first priority after our first priority is to call in the building owner team for assessment and the structural engineer to determine if the building is safe for re-entry. We've determined it is safe for re-entry for our team, and the team is going to wear full PPE gear and retrieve, triage damage kits from our offsite locations. Our first job is we've mitigated the second floor as on-site triage location due to the damage being contained to the first 1 to 2 feet of the first floor. And our first priority would be loan collections, but those are housed on top shelves and are not in immediate danger. Our immediate priority would be the artifacts and items located within the lower shelves of the first 2 feet that have suffered water damage. Those need to be triaged as a priority. Our resources are coming from recovery kits from other locations, including our offsite resource center and some of the staff's houses. And we need to have the water removed and areas cleaned and sanitized from possible mold damage, set up fans if electricity is compromised. We have several large generators to use for the fans and other items that we're going to need for cleanup. And our prevention plan includes making sure outside doors are sandbagged. We have definite knowledge of all recovery kits and other resources. We have a plan of personnel whom can work the different tasks that need to be done, running drills and scenarios, and I think I covered everything.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you. So this was great. And I definitely feel like I have seen growth from all of you as the scenarios have improved. This one is complex, but unfortunately fairly normal, especially in low-lying areas where heavy rains cause some water element to flood, but usually, especially now with extreme weather events, floodwaters, groundwater floods more regularly. So this is why we do risk assessments annually, because our risks are changing constantly, but also to identify any steps we can take for mitigation prior to something like this happening. But the second we're in the recovery phase of after an emergency has been stabilized, we do another risk assessment because our risks have changed again caused by this emergency. So just wanted to kind of throw that out there, but you all are really definitely trying to get deeper into it, which is exactly what you should do. And the whole point of running scenarios is to identify weaknesses. It's not to shame anyone, to make anyone feel stupid, but to find weaknesses that you can then improve upon. So I would encourage you all to get more people from your institution, your volunteers, the local fire department, anybody from the county or the state who you work with to run these drills with them as well. And usually they're all for it. They want you to be prepared too. That being said, on this one specifically, our big issue, the water's receded, but you haven't been there for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 6 days. There's probably mold. Like I said, in the South, mold tends to grow in like an hour. Luckily it's May, so you might have an hour and a half before the mold starts growing. So you're again dealing with multiple problems: the water damage, the mold growth, possibly no electricity. I don't know. I didn't give you that information just to make you sweat a little bit. So just to think this through and be flexible as you think about all this. I think it would be good, if you haven't already, or just in general, go back and rewatch the webinars from earlier in the series on Florida Association of Museums YouTube channel, because I think now that you've done these scenarios, you might get more out of those trainings than you did before.
There are a couple questions and answers. I think we could just read over those real quickly in the chat box in case not everybody's following that. Emery had asked how one identifies a structural engineer to assess a building in an emergency, and also pointed out that he wanted to mention that he didn't say anything about possible electrical hazard and ensuring the building is safe to enter. And then Monica had suggested that local architectural firms may be able to put you in contact with a structural engineer. And if you're part of a larger organization or city, county, university, to check with their facilities person.
Yeah, Emery and everyone, I would say actually have a structural engineer on call now. Don't wait till the emergency happens, because the best thing to do is have someone who's familiar with your building re-inspect your building, because it's so easy. Someone who's never been in your building before will miss the little nooks and crevices, especially in historic structures, especially in buildings where we have tons of stuff in storage that create mazes where they get lost. You should already be having a structural engineer come in, just in general. So find out who that is, or if you haven't had one already, it's definitely time for you to have one, and make that person on your call list of who to call if you need a structural engineer. Don't try to find one during an emergency or immediately afterwards, because everybody is going to need that structural engineer, and you'll be on the 2 to 3 week wait list. So start having those conversations, maybe those contracts in place now, and definitely make sure your facility's electricity is possibly off if there's water damage. We usually create reentry checklist. And this is one of the things we always put on it. How is it safe to enter? Has all these things been checked out? Because if you get electrocuted, I have a feeling that's not what anybody wants, but it creates, again, another complex layer to this emergency, that now you have a medical emergency plus the mold plus the water. So it limits you. But
Any other
yes.
questions on this topic? You're welcome to unmute yourself to ask a question also.
Well, I'll just chime in and add that, the most important thing here is someone needs to take charge. Someone who's qualified to take charge, knows how to deal with an emergency. It doesn't necessarily need to be your director, because your director probably has not taken as many emergency trainings as you all have. So you might be the best in an emergency. You also need to think all of this through and not run in. Never run into an emergency and put yourself or others at risk. Talk to your insurance companies and find out what they cover and what they don't cover, especially when it comes to bringing in emergency cleaning crews. So, and even having those people on contract, any sort of these collections emergency, like Belfour or a few others, could be invaluable, because again, if the emergency is region-wide, everyone's competing for those services. So just something to think about and have those contracts in place before an emergency. And I also just want to encourage you all to do what we call resilient recovery. And this is the not annoying way to use resilient, but we don't want to go back to normal, because whatever you're doing in your normal state caused that emergency to happen. So double check and see if there's something you can do to improve so you don't have this situation happen again. All right, any questions about incident command structure, tools, anything you want to ask me while I'm here?
Yeah, and I'm gonna give you an opportunity to ask that. I want to just go over a few things real quickly, and while you're thinking about what you might want to ask Rebecca. Again, after today, we'll be sending you a survey. If you'll take 2 minutes to fill that out, it really helps us in understanding what you thought about this program, as well as what programs we can offer in the future. Our website is flamuseums.org, and our Twitter and Facebook handle is FLA Museums. We do have a private group on Facebook where you can just talk to colleagues in the field. Upcoming programs, March 25th, we have this program. It's a little bit different, focused on medium to large institutions. And then in April and May, we're doing a 4-part DEIA series, focusing on 4 different topics, one of them including a practical application tabletop, similar to what we kind of went through today, but focusing on diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. So I just want to make you aware of that and how to keep updated on our upcoming programs. Again, if you want to unmute yourself to ask a question, feel free to go ahead and do that.
I just put in the chat, but I wasn't sure if you saw it. Are the other webinars in this series on demand now? And if so, where can I find them? Because I'd like to watch them with staff.
Yes, they are. They are on our YouTube channel. When I send out the email with the link for the survey, I'll send you the link to our YouTube channel, but it also is the Florida Association of Museums. And there are 4 webinars specifically as part of this series that are recorded on there.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then we have a couple comments. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. This is Catherine. I also put something in the chat about what you said. The incident commander might not be your boss, so that it's important for people to understand that the hierarchy that's where you're working might not necessarily apply when you're in an incident.
Yeah, and unfortunately that happens a lot. I actually responded to a museum in Florida after Hurricane Maria, I can't remember which one. And the director insisted that they were in charge, but they become so spread out because they're also doing media coverage. They're also trying to do other things. And it just becomes like the response actually gets downgraded because the outward facing stuff like media, social interviews became their priority. And so it really slowed down the response to actually have the director do it because they have so many other responsibilities, maybe getting funding, you know, something else. There's a job for everyone. And so it's easy enough to be like, I have the most training. I'm in charge here. Why don't you go take care of that over there? I know it's a difficult conversation to have. Sorry, Catherine.
No, that's okay. You aren't finished. Are you finished?
I'm finished. Go ahead.
No, I took some courses with the FEMA courses because I'm actually in the medical field, so I'm not sure how I even got in this, but but it's been interesting. And it goes over the incidents and command, you know, the whole structure very well. So, and you can find them on the FEMA site if you want interested in.
Yeah. So she's talking about the ICS 100C training on incident command systems. But if you're really interested, you want to learn more about incident command structures within cultural organizations. Fortunately for you, AIC is having a training later this month. I'm putting the link in the chat box with with David Carmichael, who literally wrote the book on incident command structures for cultural institutions. You can also buy his book, but I'm sure he'll tell you all about it. I believe it's free to register. You just have to create an account on the AIC website. So I don't know, it just says register. I don't know what happens when you click it. But yeah, understanding how incident command structures work and expand contrast during emergency is so invaluable. And I do touch on it briefly on the building a plan section.
And we've got a couple comments. Larry was just saying it's good to be prepared and have a battle book, so to speak, in emergencies, and also appreciate the information on having a media person because it can be both distracting and helpful, especially getting community interest for potential volunteers during recovery.
100%. We actually, every time I respond to a big emergency, we always have a media person because their job is not only to put out the message, but to make sure no one takes illicit pictures that you don't want to leak out. So having someone whose eyes are just doing that and has the knowledge to do it correctly, invaluable. Like I said, there is a job for everybody. Everyone's talents are needed. But I just want to reiterate, the whole reason, the whole purpose of doing scenarios is identify your weaknesses and ways to grow, but also just get more comfortable. And, you know, if you were scared to be in charge today, try being in charge. You learn the most from being in charge during one of these scenarios. And as you saw from the ones I wrote up, they're not that hard to come up with. If you want to make them bigger, you can add injects where you keep adding more and more stress to the situation, such as like a disgruntled lender, your insurance broker shows up. We've even had fake paparazzi show up and try to take those pictures. So, you know, think it through. You could do it. And feel free to email me if you have any questions or anything else that comes into your brains later after you slept on this and had your afternoon coffee.
Yeah, since a couple of you had asked if you could attend the next one for medium and large institutions, please feel free. The scenarios will be similar, but a little bit different for larger institutions. So you're welcome to join that one as well.
I'm tough but fair in my scenarios.
Any more questions? All right, well, thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, Rebecca. You were fantastic. It's good to have somebody who has really been through a lot of these with institutions to kind of, you know, help guide us through it. We appreciate you.
I'm always happy to help. And if you ever just need story time, I'll talk to you about the 100+ emergencies I've now responded to.
I heard about one 2 weeks ago when I was trying to get a hold of you and you were in the middle of it.
Yep. Never fun.
All right. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thanks.